Hi, good evening everyone. So, in class, we will discuss the day 8 of Gear Up Mains Answer Writing. Those who are new here, in this program, we discuss about, in this program, we discuss the previous year question of mains. We are giving in morning a single question in a Telegram group. You can join the Gear Up Mains Answer Writing 2023 on Telegram, where we will get the question on a daily basis, and in the evening at 6 p.m. we are taking this discussion of the PYQ. So a request to you, please submit the answer before attending this discussion, so it will be better to evaluate yourself, and the answer will be evaluated by our expert mentors. So take the maximum benefit of this course, and this is the free of course for everyone. So you can call your friends कि आप लोग भी आके लिखें यहाँ पे, and you can submit the answers on the Edukemy portal in the master program. You can enroll for the master program at free of cost. Okay, so the today questions was related to the modern history. This week we will do the modern history question. So today's question was evaluate the policy of the Lord Curzon and their long-term implication on the national movement. We need to evaluate the policy of Lord Curzon and their long-term implication on the national movement. So everybody know the Lord Curzon tenure starts from 1899 to 1904. He is very famous for partition of Bengal in 1905. Everybody know about the Lord Curzon, but here we need to evaluate their policy. Most of you know about the Lord Curzon, like the Indian University Act in 1904, Bengal partition in 1905, and some of you maybe know like in the Calcutta Corporation Act in the 1899. But we need to identify, we need to list out the other reforms as well. So it's a 10-marker question. So we will divide the answers into the introduction, then the body, and finally the conclusion. In introduction, you people will write the tenure of the Lord Curzon was started from 1899 till the 1905. And he was very famous for their various reforms into the country. Maybe it's the Indian University Act, maybe the police reforms, and also some of the other reforms. You can mention this in the introduction. But in the body part, there are two demands of the question. In the body part, there are two demands. Number one, we need to evaluate the policy. We need to evaluate the policy. Plus, we need to check the long-term implication. Second is the long-term implication. So the body required the two part. One is the evaluation of the Lord Curzon policy, and the second is the implication on the national movement. Okay, so in the introduction we will write about the tenure of the Lord Curzon, which started from the 1899 till the 1905. But in the body part, we will do some specific reforms. It's either the legislative reforms, administrative reforms, judicial reforms, police reforms, educational reforms. So we will list out these reforms in the body part and also mention about the year, in which year these reforms are carried out. Okay, if I clearly divide the body part of the question, you can see here. If this is the question body part demand, so we can divide the demand in the two part. One part is the policy of the Lord Curzon, which is the first part of the question. Policy of the Lord Curzon. Second part is demanding the implication. Second part of the question is demanding the implication. What was the final implication in the long term of the Lord Curzon policy? Most of you are only answering the one demand of the question, leaving the implication part. But here the question demand both the part. And the question of 10 mark, we only can write the 150 words. So there is a need to be representation through flow chart. So you can write your points in a lucid manner. And the implication, we will write about a positive implication in the long term and the negative implication in the long term. So this is the main body part, which is the demand of the question. So if you are understanding the question clearly, your 30-40% work is over. If you are not understanding the question, you will write जो आपको आता है, वो आप नहीं लिखोगे जो क्वेश्चन में पूछा गया है, जो आपको आता है आप लॉर्ड कर्जन के बारे में सब कुछ लिख दोगे, बट द डिमांड इज द what the legislative reforms or the other type of the reforms done by Lord Curzon, and what are the implication of those reforms, what are the policy and what are the implication. We need to focus on that. So you can take out your pencils and the notebook, you can write the points about the policy of Lord Curzon. If we go and going through the number 1 point, that's the, we can say, legislative reforms. In the legislative reforms, Curzon, the first legislative reforms is the Calcutta Corporation Act. Calcutta Corporation Act in 1899. In Calcutta Corporation Act in 1899, Curzon reduced the number of Indians that can be elected through election. Now the number of the nominated members are increased in the corporation, so the Indians can be taken away from the self-rule. That was the idea behind the Calcutta Corporation Act of 1899. This was the first legislative reforms. Second legislative reforms, you can write about the Monument Act, India Monument Act in 1904. This was a very good reforms. The Monument Authority of India was formed, and for the specific purpose of the protection of the monument, the protection of the heritage, that is also formed by the Lord Curzon. Clear? Now, the third legislative reforms, a very important one by the Lord Curzon, an important concept was introduced, the Credit Society Act. Credit Cooperative Societies. In 1904, Credit Cooperative Society in 1904, the Curzon introduced for providing the loans, deposits of money, so that the farmer can easily access the money and can be free from the hand of the money lenders. This was also a legislative reforms by the Curzon. So here are the three legislative reforms mainly. You can write the Calcutta Corporation Act of 1899. Second is the Indian Monument Act of 1904. And the third is the Credit Society Act of 1904. These were the legislative reforms by the Lord Curzon. If we are coming to the second heading here, if it comes to the second heading of the Lord Curzon reforms, the first was the legislative reforms. We discussed about the legislative reforms. Then the second heading is the economic reforms. Economic reforms. In economic reforms, Curzon take two steps. One, he make British money, British currency as a legal tender. As a legal tender in India, he make British currency, pound, as a legal tender in India. And at that time, 1 pound was equal to 15 rupee. This was the value, final value. 1 pound was equal to 15 rupee. So this was the economic reforms. He make the British currency as a legal tender in the country, and the value was taken as a £1 is equal to 15 rupee. Second economic reforms by the Curzon is he set up a department of commerce and industry. Department of commerce and industry. This was also a very important reforms by the Curzon. He set up a department of commerce and industry. So this department then so that the exports can be increased from the India. This was another economic reforms by the Lord Curzon. Now come to the third type of the reforms by the Lord Curzon. We can write the third type is the administrative reforms. Administrative reforms. In administrative reforms, one of the famous reforms was the Indian University Act. Indian University Act. Indian University Act of 1904. Curzon established a commission in 1902 for the Indian University, and the act was formed in the 1904, and this was a major step for improving the education in the country. So this was the first administrative reforms. Second, everybody know the Bengal partition. Bengal partition in 1905. Then these reforms also comes under the administration, and he divided the Bengal on the basis of the Hindu and the Muslim in the 1905. This was the second administrative reforms. So till now we discuss about the legislative reforms, in which we covered the Calcutta Corporation Act, we covered the Indian Monument Act and the Credit Cooperative Society Act. In the economic reforms, we covered about he set the British currency as a legal tender in the country, and he also established the Department of Commerce and Industry. Then we comes to the administrative reforms. In administrative reforms, he set up the Indian University Act in 1904 by establishing a commission in 1902, which finally approved the Indian University Act in 1904. Then the famous Bengal partition in 1905. This was the administrative reforms by the Lord Curzon. Now come to the police reforms and army reforms. He is also very famous for the police reforms. He established the Fraser Commission, under which the police reforms was conducted, and till now those reforms are continuing in the Indian police. जो रिफॉर्म्स उस टाइम पे 1904 में 19 to 1904 में किए गए थे, that reforms are still continue in the Indian police. That was the important reforms under the Fraser. Okay, and also in the army reforms, he was the first son who introduced the commander-in-chief in the army in the first time in the country. So also he was a major personality for the army reforms and the police reforms. These were some of the steps taken by the Lord Curzon. These are some of the policy of the Lord Curzon which he introduced in the country. So if we sum up in a very legible manner, so we can see this diagram. We can represent in this form in the paper. Number 1, legislative reforms. The Calcutta Corporation Act in 1999, we discussed about it. He introduced this act, and now the nominated members in the Calcutta Corporation increased. Then the Ancient Monument and Preservation Act of 1904. This was one of the important act by the Lord Curzon, and Ancient Monument Preservation Act, specifically for the preservation of the monuments. Then also we discuss about the cooperative credit society, which free the farmer from the hand of the money lenders. Then the economic reforms, he introduced the British currency as a legal tender. He formed the Department of Commerce and Industry in the country. Then the financial decentralization, here the financial decentralization means initially the central government are allocating some of the finance to the provincial government, and the provincial government are saving some of the money through taxation and some of the other methods, and the central government used to take that money from the provinces. But the Curzon introduced this decentralization, so the states can have their money on their own. So this was also a major step as a decentralization of finance by the Lord Curzon. I hope till now clear to everyone. Then about the administrative reforms, the University Commission in 1902 and the Act in the 1904. Now all the education institution comes under the central government through Indian University Act. And in the 1905, the partition of Bengal, the very famous one. Okay, clear? Now the other two, the judicial reforms and the police reforms. In judicial reforms, the number of judges in the Calcutta High Courts was increased, and he also revised the Indian Code of Civil Procedure. These were the major reforms in the judiciary. And in the police reforms, he, through the commission of the Fraser Commission, he helped in the Indian administrative provinces में control करने के लिए police reform. And this was a major step in the history of India, and till now these reforms are continuing in the Indian police. So this was the major step by the Fraser. And then the army reforms, he first time introduced the commander-in-chief, and the first commander-in-chief was the Lord Kitchener. The first commander-in-chief was the Lord Kitchener. So through this we address the first part of the question, what was the policy reforms done by the Lord Curzon. क्या क्या specific policy थी जो Lord Curzon ने लिए. Now the second part of the question required here. If we see the question again, the question is also asking about the implication on the national movement. We evaluate the Lord Curzon policy. Now the implication on the national movement, the long-term implication. So we need to write about the positive implication and the negative implication. So if we come to the positive implication here, in the positive implication, there are 3 steps, 3 points we can say in the positive implication generally. It increases the national consciousness in the public. Some of the reforms was good, but some of the reforms are not good. So it's increased the national consciousness in the public. In the case of the Bengal partition, the Hindu-Muslim unity arises there. Self-reliance, the Swadeshi movement after 1905, which make India in the self-reliance in the cases of the cloth, boycott of the British goods. Then the diaspora support from the outside the India was also there. These were the positive implication of the Curzon policy. These were the positive implication. Some of you can also add about the educational reforms, which जहाँ पे हमें self-reliance मिला. People will start studying in the university and get educated people in the country. So this was also an example of self-reliance. Then in the case of the negative implication, there is a huge list in the negative implication. Number 1, increase in the debt. You will say how? In the 1899, there was a large famine in the country. He spent very little on that famine, but he take the loan from the Britisher, and it show he spent a huge amount on the famine, and it increased the debt of the external debt of the country during the 1899 famine. IPC, Indian Penal Code, Section 124 and the next Section 153 was introduced, which specifically focus on the freedom of the speech. So freedom of speech को कैसे कम किया जाए, that was introduced through the Section 124 of the IPC under the police reforms. Then the public health in the famines 1899. Again, no spending on the public health. Malthusian principle of the Britisher. Yes, this is a valid point. The London Home League by Krishna Verma, the Indian diaspora outside the country, and some of the other major groups also, AK. Then the state control of education. State control of education means now under the Indian University Act, all the university in the country was under the central government now. So the final approval in the hand of central government. The recognition was in the hand of the central government. So that was a major issue. If the central government is not recognizing the university, then the degree will not be valid. So that is the state control of education. Communal division of society through the Bengal partition. They start dividing the Indian society through the Bengal partition, that the Hindu Muslim, they have started dividing it. And that's also appeared in the more elementary reforms in 1909, जहाँ से separate electorates का बात होने लगा for the Muslims. Okay, so these were the negative implication and the positive implication. These were, we will write here. And in the first part of the question, we will write about the what was the major policy taken by the Lord Curzon. So in the introduction, we will write the time period of the Lord Curzon from 1899 to 1905, and some of the, we can give the example of the Lord Curzon work there also. Then in the body part, we will divide the body in two parts. One is the policy, second is the implication. One part we can write the subheading wise, but in the second part we need to represent in the form of a flow chart. So we can save our time and for a better presentation. Either the first part or either the second part, you can do that. It will save your time and it will increase your presentation of answer. Then finally conclude. Conclusion is as important as introduction. Conclude the answer. Lord Curzon take the various steps, some of the very good steps related to the education, related to the like the Indian Monument Act, Credit Society Cooperative Act, police reforms. These were the very good reforms. Till now they are having the application in the country. But some of the reforms, like some of the steps like the Bengal partition, lesser spent on the public health, not focusing on the famine issue. These were some of the negative sides of the Lord Curzon reforms. So you can conclude like this, or maybe the various way of the conclusion as well. So this was the today's question. So please submit your answer so it can be evaluated by our mentors. Any doubt you can ask here. I hope from this was the 8th day of the answer discussion, there is an increase in the clarity. What is the demand of the question, what to write and how to write. These three things are the more important. And the writing in a time limit of 8 minutes, and so the presentation play a role here. How you will write a concise content in a better presentation form. So if you are attending these classes on regular basis, your clarity will increase because we are focusing on the previous year question. And the previous year question is reverse engineering to know about the exam. What is exam is all about. How or which type of the question is asked by the UPSC. Okay, so similar kind of the discussion, similar kind of the PYQ discussion, similar kind of the answer writing, focusing on the keywords we are doing in our main support program. The main support program we started on 19th, GS main support program, where we are providing you the PYQ questions from 2013 to 2022 with model answer. Every Monday there is a PYQ analysis. Analysis is not like just reading the question. Analysis, what can be the most probable question in the next year in the UPSC mains. How you can analyze, how you can predict some of the question in the mains. If you know most like a 20% or 25% of the syllabus include 75% to the 80% of the question of the mains. We need to identify those areas through the PYQ analysis. So we are doing this in this GS main support program. If you are the new one who are writing first time, or if you are writing the mains this year also, the program is beneficial for both of them. But the one condition, you have some of the basic idea about the syllabus. You at least read 2-3 times the basic books. So if you are interested, you can contact to the Edukemy. If anyone have any doubts regarding the question or any other question we discussed earlier, you can ask in the comment section. But again, I will request to you, please submit your answer before attending the discussion. So you have clarity what you missed and what you need to be right. A self-evaluation type of thing. Okay, so we will meet tomorrow again at 6 p.m. Please try to write the answer and submit to the portal. Thank you very much.